Okay, great. Welcome again, everyone. I'm Johnny Zakovich. I'm the Executive Director for Pax Christi USA, and we're really excited to host this webinar and to have you join us today. A few notes before we get started. I want to let everyone know as they join the call that everyone is muted with the exception of our speaker, Nabi, and our two facilitators, Doug and Mary. And again, as I mentioned, we're really excited about this call today. Pax Christi USA has a long history of citizen diplomacy in regards to Iran. As some of you on the call, I think, are aware, in the early 2000s, we were co-organizers of a faith leaders delegation that brought US citizens to Iran for the first time in 25 years and met with key religious leaders and political leaders during that visit. We also have a history of working diligently on other peace-building initiatives between our two countries, including our support for the Iran nuclear deal during the Obama administration. We also participated in a meeting with the former president of Iran at the UN about a little bit over a decade ago. And most recently, we worked actively to stop a US war from becoming a reality with Iran in the wake of the president's decision to assassinate General Soleimani back in January. So Iran and the work of peace building between our two countries is an area of special interest for Pax Christi USA and has been for a really long time. As I mentioned, during the course of this call, only our speakers and our facilitators will be unmuted, but you will have opportunities to ask questions if you're interested. Questions can be posted in the chat box, and you can find the chat function along the bottom of your screen, and you can enter your questions into the chat box, at which time later in the call, when we do questions and answers, Mary and Doug from our UN team will help to facilitate and get to some of those questions as time allows. Our call will last 1 hour, and as I mentioned, it is being recorded, and we will share it in a day or two if you have other people you know that would be interested in seeing it at a later time. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our two facilitators who will then introduce our main speaker. I'm really excited to have with us today Doug Hostetter and Mary Yelenick of the Pax Christi International UN team in New York. And I'm really grateful for all the work they've done in setting this webinar up and in bringing the work of Nabi to the attention of Pax Christi USA and allowing us to have an opportunity for a dialogue today. So Mary and Doug, the call is yours.
Thank you, Johnny. Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to say, just before I introduce our esteemed speaker today, I wanted to say a few words about my co-facilitator, Doug Hostetter, because a lot of you don't know Doug. Doug is with me on the UN NGO team for Pax Christi International. He's actively pursued peace his entire life and has published widely on issues of war and peace and nonviolence. Doug was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, and he chose to do his alternative service working for the Mennonite Central Committee in Vietnam in the middle of the war zone during the height of the war. So Doug has an exquisite sensitivity to working with other people and pursuing peace. More relevant to today's conversation, Doug organized ecumenical and interfaith gatherings in New York between US and Canadian religious leaders and the Iranian president in 2006, 2007, and 2008 to explore ways that the religious community could work for peace with Iran. He also visited Iran for a 2-week friendship learning tour in 2008. And last year, Doug presented a paper, Interfaith Paths to Peace, via Skype, to the first international conference on peace and conflict resolution at the University of Tehran. So I'm very pleased to be working with Doug at the United Nations for Pax Christi. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, our very esteemed speaker, Mr. Nabi Sonboli, who is counselor at the Iranian Mission to the United Nations in New York, a position that he has held for the past 4 years. Counselor Sonboli is a graduate of the University of Tehran and has published widely in Iranian and Western journals. He worked for 19 years as a research associate at the Institute for Political and International Affairs, or IPIS, one of Iran's oldest think tanks, whose main function is to facilitate dialogue between Iran and other countries. From 2003 to 2006, Counselor Sonboli worked as an IPIS research fellow and representative in Tokyo, Japan. And between 2009 to 2012, he held the same position in Berlin, Germany. So he can certainly compare his experience here in this country with his experience in those other countries. And it's a very interesting story, I think. As counselor at the Iranian Mission in New York now, Counselor Sonboli works to encourage more dialogue about UN-related issues, including refugees, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, the Middle East, and Iranian foreign policy. Doug and I have met with him on prior occasions, and we were so impressed with what he had to say that we thought that you would be too, and I think you will be. During the past 4 years, he has coordinated and organized more than 60 events requested by diverse groups from different countries, including many American groups, ranging from university students to NGOs to think tanks, and now today, Pax Christi USA, representing Americans dedicated to nonviolence, global peace, and dialogue. So let's commence this dialogue. I welcome our very esteemed guest, Counselor Nabi Sonboli. Nabi?
Hi, Mary. Thank you very much for the very good introduction, actually, I have to say. And hi, Johnny and Doug. I want to thank you for organizing this event. It's my honor to be among you, the distinguished participant in this event. I hope all of you have and enjoy a safe and secure place and be healthy at this time that everyone is facing a lot of challenges because of the COVID-19. I am going to share my presentation, and as it was mentioned, I'm going to somehow begin with a comparison between my experience in the past in Japan, in Germany, and here in the United States. The reason that I want to talk about this issue is that I find the highly different understanding of Iran in these three different contexts that I have lived and worked. And I have also been in contact with the research institutes and universities in other countries too. When I visited Japan, it was very, very unpredictable. I didn't know that there are a huge number of Iranologists there. The Tokyo University of Foreign Studies and Osaka University of Foreign Studies, they have been training students for I think 60 or maybe right now 70 years, and they have trained a lot of Iranologists. They study Persian language, Iranian poems, Iranian culture, and also Iranian history. We didn't have the same, I didn't see the same situation in Germany. However, I found that the interesting point regarding Japan is that they have been able to develop their own understanding of Iran, an independent understanding of Iran. When I went to Germany, I noticed that they also have, because the Iran-German relations is much older than Iran-Japan relations. Historically, it's deeper, the interactions, communications, but in terms of the influence of different actors, I found that it is deep. However, new elements have influenced their understanding of Iran, especially after the revolution, because part of the study is based on university education. Of course, they do not have those courses of Persian language studies like Japan, and but however, there are a limited number of people who know Persian who have studied in Iran, or they have been able, especially through trade and for different occasions, they have been able to visit Iran and have a better understanding of Iran, and they try to develop a little bit more independent of the influence of other players. When I came here, I found it's very different. I have not seen any now deep understanding here about the. Of course, there are very some or a few institutions that study in Iran or teach Persian language, but because of the lack of communications, they have not been able to travel Iran. They have not been able to learn Persian language very well. They have lost their contact with Iranian society, and they have tried to replace this lack of direct communication with the Iranian community that are living in here. The Iranian community that are living here, there are different groups, but part of those who are politically active or mostly are are from the opposition groups. Naturally, they have their own understanding. They have immigrated to the United States after the revolution, mostly, and they have their own understanding of the situation in Iran. So, but it's not limited to that. I try to gradually begin with my presentation and about the understanding of Iran here in the United States, why we are in this situation. And I'll try to touch upon the Iranian strategy culture, how we can understand Iranian situation, Iranian culture and decision-making system. Then I'll try to come to the new developments regarding JCPOA, recent resolution, snapback and sanctions and COVID and other issues. When I compare, because I want to compare my 4 years of experience in here within 2 slides, because I came here when the presidential election was going on, presidential campaign was going on in 2016. So I was familiar with the debates and I was following them. And right now, again, we are at the time that the campaign is going on for November election. After 3 years, Iran, if I want to compare the situation right now with 4 years ago, Iran and the United States at that time were meeting regularly. Sometimes the people were talking that they are meeting each other more than many other foreign ministers, or sometimes they were joking that they meet each other more than their families, their wives. And the US image in Iran was improving after 3 decades. JCPOA is signed by Iran on 5+1. Iran implemented its commitment sooner than expected. Sanctions partly removed, but the US officials, even during Obama administration, were dragging their foot about the removing sanctions. However, when I came here, what I heard in here 4 years ago was that within the next 4 or 5 years, Iran-US relations is going to be normal. This is what I heard in here 4 years ago. During the past 3 years, the trend completely changed to the opposite direction. Trump came to power. He made his first visit to Saudi Arabia. He withdrew from JCPOA, imposed sanctions, stopped issuing nuclear waivers, designated IRGC as FTO, and also supported somehow Israeli targets of Iranian forces in Syria. Also, the situation right now, we had the assassination of General Soleimani. The US tried, and right now the US tries to destroy the remaining legal framework, or I have to say maybe a political framework of the JCPOA that still remains. And there is no formal communication. The US tries to extend arms embargo or snap back all sanctions, and the 2 sides has been on the verge of military clash at least 2 times during the past few months. So, and JCPOA is also in, we call it in ICU. In total, completely opposite of what's going on 4 years ago, the maximum pressure faces with maximum resistance. This is but the question is that why all this happened? Why what we expected to be something normal right now is completely abnormal. It's completely the opposite of what the people expected. I think that the answer to this question goes back to the Iranian and the US understanding of each other. The US strategy toward Iran is rooted in the US understanding of Iran, but the understanding is not an independent understanding. It is a constructed understanding, and it is a fabricated understanding. As far as, if you go back and study the narrative that the United States has used against Iran, you find these terms: extremist rogues, acts of evil, state sponsor of terrorism, looking for hegemony, aggressive. These are before the JCPOA. And however, it has continued. Trump narrative is the same. He talks about malign activities, proliferation, support for terrorism, threatening freedom of navigation, and also the fuels conflicts across the Middle East, malign behavior, etc. And also, unfortunately, I do not see a much better narrative among the Democrat candidates. I reviewed all their, when there was many candidates, I checked all what kind of phrases they are using to express about Iran. They were the same. They also believe that Iran is destabilizing actor, and have malign behavior, look for nuclear weapons, and things like that you are familiar with. So when I study also the special representative of the US, Mr. Hook, narrative about Iran, he also always talks about expansionism, malign behavior, and he regards Iran as principal driver of instability. With these kind of understanding, it's clear that what kind of information he is going to provide for Trump and Pompeo to decide. So this is because the concepts that we are using, the way of thinking, the glass that we are using to see the real world, it shapes our understanding. It's filtered the information that we receive, and it also filters the information that we provide for the decision makers. But where all these narratives come from? There is an article written by Jeffrey Goldberg, 2016, about the Obama doctrine. He says in that article, it was published in The Atlantic, a widely held sentiment inside the White House is that the most prominent foreign policy thinkers in Washington doing the bidding of their Arab and pro-Israeli founders. He adds, I've heard one administration official refer to Massachusetts Avenue, the home of the many think tanks, as Arab occupied territory. So the understanding of Iran, the factory that construct Iran image in the US, one of them is the Arab occupied territory plus Israeli occupied territory plus opposition occupied territory. It's not limited to just the Arab occupied territory. This is the network of Saudi Arabia in Washington. They have lots of institutions that they are working. You have to add the Israeli network in Washington and UAE network in Washington. And when you see the consequences of the US, all these efforts for the US policy, you see that actually in practice, the US is representing the Israelis and Saudis and Emiratis, not the United States. Hook says recently in CFR, I think it was, if you look at our record over the last 3 years, standing very strongly with Saudi, the UAE and Bahrain, and with also with Israel. This is the result of lacking an independent understanding of Iran. That the main drivers of the US foreign policy toward Iran are not American, or others that they do not benefit from any peaceful relations. None of them benefit from solving the problems between the United States. All of them, all these forces benefit from US-Iran confrontation. And a researcher in here told me that in Washington, the politicians sell US foreign policy to buy domestic politics, especially when it comes to the Middle East. This is not my understanding because I have not been in Washington, I have not worked there, but this is what I heard in here. That's why what I see when I compare how much the US foreign policy towards the Middle East have improved the US interest and welfare, I see that not only zero, but also it has been costly for the United States because the US foreign policy in the Middle East have imposed more than $4 trillion on the US. And the current situation of the healthcare system and the problems infrastructure that I see in here and we see in here is the result of all those costs that was imposed on the United States by the US friends and allies and partners, not by Iran or others. There is another aspect of Iran threat in Washington. Iran threat in Washington in the US is a big business. Is a business that every year is more than between $50 billion to $100 billion. Without an Iran threat, it's not possible to sell so much weapons to the region. Saudi Arabia is the most important customer of the US weapons. UAE, Egypt, Iraq, if you look at the facts and figures that are produced by CIPRI, you'll find a lot of information about their military budgets. And you are familiar with these pictures of the past few months or 1 year. So Iran image, as I mentioned in the US, is constructed, and Iran threat is manufactured because of those reasons that I mentioned. Because of the first, free riding, it's free for them, but for the US, it's costly riding because it has imposed huge costs on the US and also in the region. And because of the benefits that some companies may have in trade, weapons trade. But what happened on the other side of this story in Iran? How Iranian thinks? What is the Iranian strategic thinking? What factors have shaped Iranian strategic thinking in foreign policy that also shapes Iranian behavior? Because we are in here and in the region also faces with Iranian behavior. The main developments, if you study, if you listen to the Iranian politicians, Iranian researchers, you'll find always they substantiate their arguments in foreign policy with these facts and figures. These are the main issues that has shaped and influenced Iranian strategic thinking. The military coup, 1953 military coup, Iraqi war, external support for terrorist groups inside Iran, unilateral and multilateral sanctions, military threats, arms embargo, regime change efforts, invasion of Afghanistan by Soviet Union and the US, invasion of Iraq by the US, efforts to exclude Iran from the regional and international system, containment, political isolation, pushback, JCPOA negotiations, and then the US withdrawal. All of this has had a lot of influence on Iranian strategic thinking and calculations. Just one example that is still alive is the Iraqi war. I do not want to go into details of the consequence of all those problems, just in one single case that I think have had the most important consequences and impact on Iranian strategy is Iran-Iraq war. Iraq fired more than 530 missiles toward Iranian cities. 5 million Iranians participated in the war. More than 200,000 people were killed, 600,000 were injured or crippled. $1 trillion was the economic cost of the war. Saddam launched 560 attacks with chemical warfare agents against Iran and committed 35 chemical attacks against Iranian cities and villages. More than 100,000 Iranian citizens were either killed or injured by chemical weapons. This is the Iraqi war experience that is still alive because almost all the decision makers in Iranian political system are still those who participated or in the Iraqi war or have had the experience of the Iraqi war. That's why the influence of Iraqi war on Iranian strategic thinking has been a lot. That's why I think the Iraqi war is Iran's never again. And that's why the Iranians are highly sensitive regarding their defensive capabilities because it reminds them of the Iraqi war. the US and its allies and partners in the region supported Iraq, and you know what was the final destination of the dictator that imposed a lot of costs on the region, on the US and Iran. And it's still there, the cost has not finished. The cost that Saddam imposed on the region has not finished. The current US involvement in Iraq is still, because the US entered into war in Iraq in 1990s, not 2003. When Saddam invaded Kuwait, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait invited the United States to intervene. And since 1990, the United States has been engaged in a war. So the war in Iraq is a 30 years old war, not a 20 years old war or 17 years old war that many people in here claim. What Iranians learned from their experiences is that we have to rely on ourselves for security, self-reliance on security. That's why Iran invests on all its security equipments that needs, from tanks to missiles to fighters, etc. Iran also economically have looked for autarky because of the experience of the sanctions. And also Iran have learned that the only situation that will give result and can rely on is the youth. And Iran has invested a lot on education. And also Iran is among the rare countries in the region that have to rely on its people, because there is no external ally that the system can rely on. And nobody can say that if we were not there, you were supposed to collapse, like what Trump says to Saudi Arabia. Nobody cannot use that argument against Iran. But how Iran has been able to resist all these years against the US pressures and international pressures that not been limited to the US. What the United States has succeeded is that the United States has internationalized its pressures on Iran. This Iranian soft powers include, as they say, believing in God, peaceful culture and identity, inclusive and elected system, institutions, consensus building mechanism, national security and national unity, national solidarity, and political stability. These are the softwares that have helped Iran to resist during the past 4 decades. And the hardware power that has helped Iran to resist has been indigenous military and security power, economic resilience, 14 million young people with higher education, scientific and technological achievements, geography, vast geography, stratification with 15 neighbors, 82 million population, strong infrastructure, national and regional markets, and natural resources. These are the elements that have helped Iran to resist all US and others' pressure. The US and many blames Iran for contributing, as I mentioned, to regional instabilities. I want to just mention a few points about the Iranian regional role and go back to the regional instabilities. If you go back and study what the Iranian position during the past 4 decades, Iran was among the first countries that opposed the occupation of Afghanistan by Soviet Union. Iran accepted more than 2.5 million Afghan and Iraqi refugees that right now the US sanctions are negatively impacting the Afghan refugees. Iran opposed Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. The US benefited, and the Arab countries that were supporting Iraq during the war against Iran, they benefited from Iran's position. Iran supported Northern Alliance against Taliban and Al-Qaeda during the 1990s, while the US allies formally recognized Taliban and were supporting them. And Iran played a key role in bringing peace in Tajikistan in the 1990s. There was a civil war in there. Iran also played a constructive role in Bonn Conference to bring peace in Afghanistan in 2002. And the US officials confirmed that. Iran also contributed to regional peace in economic terms, trade, transition, and investment. Iran negotiated with EU3 and implemented the additional protocol from 2003 to 2005. Iran negotiated with 5+1 and implemented its commitment according to IAEA reports. And also Iran proposed inclusive peace plans to end the conflict in Syria and Yemen. However, also again, Iran supported the Syrian and Iraqi forces against ISIS. Iran has been in war with drug traffickers. Iran is the medical hub of the region. In 2018, more than 300,000 people visited Iran for treatment, mostly from the regional countries. This is the result of investment on education and healthcare. The monies that the people that here in Washington, the US government argues that where are all those monies? Those monies were invested mostly in, as I will mention in future if I have time, on these things. That right now you can compare how Iran has managed COVID-19 with how the US has managed the COVID-19, and you will find that where is the mismanagement. And the Iranian Navy has also been active in fighting with pirates. But how Iran contributions have been appreciated during the past 3 decades. When Taliban defeated, the US put Iran as part of axis of evil. When Iran, after Iran cooperated with the negotiating and cooperated with the IAEA and implemented the voluntarily additional protocol, US and EU3 referred Iranian file to UNSC and imposed 5-6 resolutions and crippling sanctions. 2015-2020, after Iran implemented JCPOA, the US withdrew from the agreement and imposed crippling sanctions and maximum pressure. And also Iran played a key role in Iraq and Syria in fighting ISIS. Iran lost a lot of forces in that war. And after the failure or weakness of ISIS, the US designated IRGC as an FTO and terrorist organization. And finally assassinated the General Soleimani that had a key role in fighting ISIS and coordinating the forces to fight ISIS on the ground. This is how Iran has been appreciated, and these are the factors that shape Iranian understanding of the situation of the US policy. I want to just briefly mention a few points about the Middle East instabilities, because the Trump administration withdrew from JCPOA with the pretext that Iran has contributed to the instabilities in the region, and JCPOA has had not any effect to bring peace in the region, because it was the main argument. And after 2 years, right now that the US is pushing back, is trying to destroy the remaining of JCPOA and impose military embargo, the weapons embargo on Iran, they also still raise the same issue of that Iran has been has had malign behavior and has contributed to regional instabilities. Look at the Global Peace Index 2018 and 19. The Peace Index mentioned the region as the least peaceful part of the world. It is home to 4 of the 10 least peaceful countries in the world, including Afghanistan. Iran is located among the least peaceful countries in the world. This is our location. But what has been the root cause of all these instabilities? You can check all these situations, but what has happened. Internationally, long-term military intervention, militarization of the region, and global competition. What I see, and it's going to deteriorate in coming years, see is that the Middle East and North Africa is once again turned to a military playing ground of global powers. This is very dangerous. That will lead to more instabilities in the region. Look at the region in the map and the US military interventions in the region. The countries that have the United States intervened are the least peaceful countries in the world. Afghanistan, Iraq, the US or its allies, Yemen, Libya, and Syria. These are the countries that are least peaceful, and all are the countries that the United States has intervened. It has not Iran that has intervened in these countries. And the United States and its allies have intervened. Regionally, it is not, but the root cause of the instabilities does not limit to the US. Regionally, we have misperceptions, lack of dialogue. There is not enough dialogue in the region. We have exclusive approaches. Saudis follow an exclusive approach toward Iran, Qatar, Turkey. It is not limited to Iran. It is not limited to Shia Sunni. what their argument is that Arab world is not your business. They put pressure on the UN Secretary General to withdraw its invitation to Iran to a dialogue 4 years ago. It was, I think, on Syria, but right now and in recent years, see what happened in Syria. Militarism, as I mentioned before, and also encouraging the US military intervention. Since 1990s, and even before that, it was the US allies that encouraged the US to involve militarily in the region. But the more important cause of instabilities, I think, is domestic ones. You can go and check the Arab Human Development Report 2009. It is before the Arab Spring. What it says, how it describes the Arab world, it says it is inefficiency, unemployment, low quality education, ethnic and sectarian conflicts, urbanization, growth of population, corruption, lack of political freedom, and military governments. These are the main factors that led to Arab Spring and the instabilities after that. If you check the different papers in recent years, you see that there are some 250 million people out of total Arab population of 400 million people that are poor, vulnerable, and marginalized. You can check also the most important challenge that they face. According to IMF and other sources, they say that we need 60 to 100 million new jobs by 2030 and 27 million jobs in 2018, from 2018 to 2023. So how it's possible to create all these jobs in the least peaceful part of the world? And if you compare 2009 UNDP report with 2018, it's telling. It's again says low quality governance, stagnant economies, deteriorating education, healthcare, insufficient quality jobs, degrading environments, water shortages, food insecurity, encouraged urbanism, and rampant corruption. This is how Arabs describe their own systems. This is not my understanding or my explanation about the system in Arab world. And the UAE foreign minister a few days ago, he had a speech, and at MEI, and the moderator asked him, what's the main problem? Why the others intervene in Arab world? He said that the main problem of the Arab world is its weakness. Arab world is weak, he's right. But who is responsible for the weakness of Arab world, and why Iran is blamed, and why Iran should pay the price of the weakness of Arab world? These are the questions that need to be answered. Arabs have to solve their problems by themselves. Instead of doing that, they are using the US as a tools in their FP foreign policy toolkit to weaken Iran. So Iran is paying the price of inefficiency and corruption of the Arab world, inefficient governments, inefficient system in the Arab world. And it's blamed by the US as the root cause of, as Hook says, driving force of instabilities in the region. Instabilities in the region, first and foremost, is related to domestic problems, and the second is related to the US interventions in the region and global competition in that region. COVID-19 have made all social and economic factors worse right now. That's why what do we do and what do we expect in future? The situation in the region and the instabilities, I expect that will increase in the region. The last point is to understand the region, as I mentioned, is to follow the money. These are the facts and figures about the military investment and military expenditure of these countries in the region, how it diverts resources from social and the development projects to military projects. Iran is blamed for following an expansionist and hegemonic. Recently, Hook has said that Iran was looking for global hegemony. Compare Iranian military budget with the Saudi Arabia, and you will understand what is the meaning of global hegemony with only between $5 to $15 billion of nuclear of military investment. Yeah, and this is the Iranian budget of the 1395 that I tried to calculate. Most of the budget was on education and research, to about 22 billion, welfare about 20 billion, health, economy, industry, energy, and the last one was defense, about $6 billion. This is not the budget of a country that's looks for hegemony or can follow an expansionist foreign policy or be the main problem in the Middle East. The problem here is that the US and EU invest in East Asia, send their militaries and military equipment to the Middle East and North Africa, I mean their neighborhood, and expect peace and democracy to flourish in this region. That's the problem. Thank you very much. And if there is any question, I'm ready to answer during the next part of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, maybe you could start by unsharing your screen, Nabi, and then we'll, perhaps I will start with a question. I very much appreciate your presentation, very detailed, lots of information. The one part of it, which I might have some questions about, was your characterization of what the Democratic Party is likely to do if we are to have a new president elected in the fall that would be from the Democratic side. And I've been talking with quite a number of people who are highly involved, and there is real hope that that the U.S. would rejoin the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran. And one of the questions which one of the Democratic activists asked me to ask was, if the U.S. rejoined the JCPOA and actually eliminate the sanctions, would Iran also completely rejoin the JCPOA? I know that as the U.S. has violated, left the JCPOA and instigated sanctions, Iran has relaxed some of its involvement in some of the restrictions. So if the U.S. rejoined, would Iran fully implement?
Iran has publicly announced that all the steps that we have taken are reversible. It means that all the steps that Iran have taken are still within the framework of JCPOA. It means that Iran still believes in JCPOA, and the actions that Iran have taken are reversible. But the problem is that I'm not sure that the administration tried to destroy the framework, the legal framework that has remained by introducing new measures at the Security Council and also at IAEA. You are familiar with the recent developments. However, the main problem is not that. What I'm concerned is that if the Democrats, as in the past it has happened, if they want to follow the same talking point on Iran, they want to base their strategy on the understanding that they have received from occupied territory in Washington. So what we are going to expect? I don't expect that they are able to change the U.S. policy. They want to do that. That's the real concern. But that I'm not sure, because when I'm talking about and when I'm not optimistic about their policy is that when I hear their voice, when I listen to them and review their writings, I see that all those key concepts that are well developed and constructed here by public relations, receiving money from Saudi Arabia and Israel, they all still, you can find all of them in their in the democratic narrative on Iran. So when I see that those key elements, I expect the same policies to be continued. That's my concern. But regarding Iran, I think that Iran will, the actions are reversible. And if the United States go back to JCPOA, Iran will also be ready to reverse those actions.
Thank you.
Okay. Nabi, we have two questions. One is a question for me. You mentioned, you referenced COVID. I think a lot of people in this country don't understand what sanctions mean with respect to Iran and how insidious those sanctions are. And you mentioned the fact that Iran is such a significant force in healthcare in your region. Could you share with us a bit of how those sanctions are hurting the people in your country? And secondly, there's a question from some of our friends in Washington who do a lot of lobbying. If you would address that question, then I'll ask the follow-up question.
Well, let me thank you very much for raising this important question. About 95% of medicines are produced in Iran, are produced at home. However, the 5% that we are importing are very expensive, and they are the medicine for rare disease are not produced. And the most of the problems that we have had in recent years are related to those 5% of the medicines. However, we are producing the medicine, but we are importing raw materials to produce those medicines. The impact of the sanctions are on transactions to import raw materials for medicines, and also those 5% of medicines that we are producing, we are not able to produce at home. That's why we have had lots of challenges in this field before COVID-19. After COVID-19, the challenges increased because if I may share the picture and there's some information about this issue, the main victim of the US sanctions after COVID-19 was Iranian nurses and physicians. Based on unofficial news, more than 100 doctors and nurses lost their life during the first weeks of COVID-19 pandemic because of the shortage of equipments. And the US administration joined the COVID-19, not the people, and against the people. They increased sanctions and they did not try to facilitate, although the UN requested, there was many requests from different players that the United States facilitate Iranian access to medicine and humanitarian assistance because of the COVID-19, but the United States rejected all those efforts. It has another aspect because, as you are familiar in here, you were able to stay at home, and the United States, the US Congress passed more than $2 trillion budgets to support the businesses, to support the people to stay at home. But Iranian government was not, because of the sanctions, was not able to finance 20 million households to stay at home. So to preserve the jobs and support the small businesses, Iran had difficulty. Iran needed at least $5 billion. Iran asked the IMF for such a loan, but the United States prevented that loan and blocked the Iranian access to IMF. And it added to oil prices decrease, and also the US sanctions that had prevented before that Iranian access to its revenues outside the country. So all these prevented the Iranian government from being able to support the people during the pandemic enough, and the government had to reopen the economy sooner because of because of the main reason was lack of budget. And it led to the second wave of increase in COVID-19 victims and casualties. That's how the US sanctions impacted and worsened the situation in Iran regarding the COVID-19.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, speaking on behalf of myself, and I'm sure many others on the call. I'm so sorry for our complicity in the many deaths in your country for so many reasons, including COVID. One additional question, Nabi, again, asked by some of our friends in Washington who do a lot of work for peace and do a lot of lobbying. Who are the MEK in Iran, and what do they believe? What is their agenda? They noted they're frequently lobbying in the halls of Congress. Thank you.
I'm not an expert on MEK, and as far as I have studied about them, that's a group that they were involved in politics before the revolution. They were leftists, and they began their political activity inside Iran during the Shah by killing American citizens. The first thing that they did during 1950s was that. And they shifted their ideology toward leftism, then to Islamism. And after the revolution, they tried to capture power. They turned to weapon inside the streets. And there are, according to some documents, they killed more than 17,000 people in the first years after the revolution. And then they exited the country and joined Iraq against Iran during the war against Iran. So they betrayed their country. And they were the US, the Iraqi ally against Kurds and even against the United States in the first Kuwait war. You can go and check what they did when the United States invaded and attacked Iraq during 1990s, and how they suppressed Kurd and Shias and their involvement in killing many Iraqis in Iraq. But when in 2003 that the US invaded Iraq, they changed their position and they became an American agent. And the Iraqis expelled them from their country. They sent their bases, most of their forces, to Albania, and they lobby here in Washington for support. So this is there are lots of reports. If you search, you can find a lot of documentary reports that it has been prepared by themselves, by those who have defected from the group, about their ideology. They are a sect that they do not believe in any democracy or anything that we can say it's similar to the US values or Iranian values. They are the most negative, they have the most negative image among Iranians and Iranian political groups, even the opposition groups that are outside the country. So they have the least chance of being able to enter the country, even if something happened, a change happens. So the United States is investing on the worst kind of people that they never be able to be, because they do not have any political base. They do not have a strong political base in the country. And that's how they invest and waste their money and time on their on these forces. I think the American officials, at least some of them, the intelligence services, this foreign ministry, defense ministry, they know who are these people, and they just try to use them as intelligence gathering forces and agents from inside Iran. This is the only use that they have for the foreign intelligence services and foreign countries. And this is not my opinion. I was in Germany. I traveled to Bonn because one of their bases are in Bonn. I went to Bonn in 2000, I think it was 10, to participate in a conference. I took a taxi. The taxi driver asked me where I'm from. I said that I'm from Iran. He was a Pakistan driver. He talked about the Iranian opposition groups in Bonn, because the MEK is one of the bases, was traditionally in Bonn. And he told that how stupid are these people, because they are just working for the foreign intelligence services in here. This is the impression of a taxi driver in Bonn in 2003 about this group. So you can imagine what is their image in other countries. This is the understanding that I want to share with you from other sources.
Thank you. I'll ask you one of the difficult questions for most Americans. Iran is often portrayed as anti-Semitic, and it's frequently quoted that Iran wants to push Israel into the sea. what can you tell me about the relationship of the Iranian government to the Jewish community in Iran? Most Americans aren't even aware that there is a fairly significant Jewish community in Iran. But talk about that, but also talk about what is the official relationship or position on Israel? Are there circumstances on which Iran would accept or recognize Israel as a legitimate state?
Thank you very much for raising this important question, because this is something that always are asked. Many people are, for religious reasons, they support Israel, and they think that Iran is not right when in its position. Iran is anti-Semitic country, etc. The Jews have lived in Iran for more than 2,500 years ago. My question is that, is it possible for a small minority to live in an anti-Semitic society for 2,500 years ago, for 2,500 years? It's impossible. Let's go back and talk about the Islamic Republic. What happened after the Islamic Republic? One of the first things that was done, it was the different minorities representative referred to religious leaders and wanted to know their position. The constitution gave their rights according to their situation. Jews are between, there are different estimations, between 8,000 to 20,000 people right now, because I heard last week from the Jewish representative, he has written an article in an English, I think it was published in here in the United States, that there are about 20,000. I had heard other figures that they are about 8. I don't know exactly, but anyway, suppose that they are 20,000 or 25,000 people. They have one MP in the parliament, while every 250,000 people, other people, they have one MP in the parliament. So compare their voting power of the Jews with the Muslims in Iran. The Christians are about 110, 20,000. The facts are that there are different estimations. They may be more than that. They have 3 MPs in the parliament. The system is not anti-Semitic. The society is not anti-Semitic. What I heard and I read last week from the representative of the Jewish community in Tehran, I was talking 10 years ago with a friend from Shiraz, because a big Jewish community are in Shiraz, and I asked him how's the relation between the people and the Jewish community. He said it's excellent, and many times, because most of the Jews are in jewelry market, he says that many times the people prefer to go and buy jewelry from the Jewish people. And if you go back in the system, in the society, they are respected, and also the Jewish. And this respect is mutual. It's not unilateral. They respect the system, and the system respects them and their rights. If you compare the situation with other countries in the region, you can find how you can compare other facts and figures. And regarding the the question, Iranian position on Israel, and it is not the Palestinian issue, and it is not limited to the Palestinian issue. It is, as I mentioned in previous presentation that you were there, it is the historical understanding of Iran. Iran and the Middle East are a mosaic society. It has different parts on society, ethnic, religious, language, they are interconnected. If we want to divide the region according to ethnicity or language or anything else, we have to create an eternal war in the Middle East. Never the war will end because of the situation, because of the mosaic context that we are living in. What is our understanding of the region? not only the Palestinian issue, but you can study Iranian peace plan for Afghanistan, Iran peace plan for Yemen, Iran peace plan for Syria, Iran peace plan or support for Lebanon. Iran basically believes that the systems must be inclusive. The system must include all parts of the society, whether they are Jewish, they are Christian, they are Kurds, they are Muslim, they are Shia, they are Sunni, because all these societies are multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural. You cannot separate them. You cannot divide them. Geographically, it's impossible to divide these regions. It is, in here, one of the issues that are discussed is that the United States is supporting the Jewish for religious reasons, and it has domestic reasons that they are supporting, that they have the access to holy city and holy shrines. The Palestinian and the territories and the religious sites in there are not only holy for Jews and Christians. It is holy. They are holy places for all the people in the Middle East and in the Islamic countries. So, if the United States want to follow domestic politics in that region, you have to recognize the same right for all Islamic countries to follow domestic politics in the Palestinian territories. What does it mean? It means no peace. And it leads to no peace. That's why I think Iranian position on the Palestinian issue is an inclusive system that includes all. This is Iranian position, but never Iran has said that we are going to impose our position on the Palestinians or on the Jewish or on other communities that are living there. This is Iranian position based on Iranian historical understanding. It was very amazing that when I was studying and I came here in the United Nations, I found that before the revolution, Iran had the same position of an inclusive system. That's why supporting inclusive system in the countries in the region, from Yemen to Afghanistan to Libya to Lebanon to Syria to Palestine issues, it is the historical understanding and lesson that we have learned in the region. That's why it is not something related to this political system that will change tomorrow. If we change our position, the first country that will suffer from changing is our own country, because we are a multi-ethnic, multicultural society. We have Kurds, we have Azeris, we have Christians, we have Jews, we have Baluch, we have Turkmens, we have a lot of different ethnicities in our country. If you want to support any group to have its own independence, to have a separate state for himself, for herself, we will be the first victim of such a change in our policy. That's why supporting inclusive system is based on Iranian historical understanding of the mosaic society that we are living in. It is not going to change. But if they decide differently, if Palestinians decide differently, or Israelis, or Jews, or Christians, never Iran is able to impose its position on others.
Thank you, Councillor Sonboli. I'm afraid we've reached the end of our time, and I wish we could go on. This has been a very rich and very, I think, enriching conversation. We've heard things here that Americans ordinarily don't hear or pay attention to, at least many of us. I would like this conversation to continue if you'd be willing at some point in the future, if other people would be interested as well, because we have many, many more questions and many more things to discuss. The most important thing, I think, for us right now is to listen as a group at Pax Christi USA. And thank you for sharing with us your experience, your views, and for raising questions, I think, for a lot of us that we need to really think carefully about. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coordinating and organizing this very important event. Thank you. I would like to thank all the participants for their patience. And yesterday I told that unfortunately the Middle East situation is not so good to present good news. And you said that the good news is that we are talking. And thank you very much for providing this opportunity, this good news for all of us to talk and share our ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone for joining us today. And I want to especially say thank you to Doug and Mary for helping to set this up and for inviting Nabi to be with us and for facilitating our conversation. Thanks to everyone for your participation today.
Thank you.